9 people? That's just too many. What do you think this is, a baseball team? I've always had a dream since I was a child. A cute house like the ones in picture books, with a white dog in the yard. But reality isn't always so sweet. I finally managed to get my own house. But when I returned from work, it had transformed into something like a dormitory. I won't forgive them for this. My name is Mary, a 32-year-old office worker. I've been focused on my career, but since my late 20s, my friends started getting married one after another. There were months when wedding gifts really added up to my expenses. Feeling a mysterious urgency, I started trying my hand at dating.
Mary, when are you going to give me grandkids?
Every time I visited home, my dad, David, would say this, and it made me so uncomfortable that I gradually stopped visiting as much. My mom passed away when I was young, so I grew up with my dad, my brother, and my paternal grandparents. My brother married early and built a house near our childhood home. He has 2 daughters, my adorable nieces. I've got cute nieces at my brother's place. Isn't that enough for you?
But you, Mary.
We always ended up arguing about it. Then, after a while, my dad was involved in a traffic accident. By the time I got to the hospital, he was in a very bad state. My energetic father quietly passed away while my brother's family and I watched over him. Dad, I had someone I wanted you to meet. Actually, at that time I had a boyfriend, introduced to me by a friend. He had just proposed, and we decided to marry. He was a bit of a show-off, but a kind man. His name was Richard. Now with both my parents gone and my brother having his own family, it's gotten lonely, hasn't it? I muttered this, stroking my cat Lucy after returning home from the funeral.
Mary, you're not alone. You're going to be a part of my family.
Richard, sitting next to me, gently held my hand. He came to check on me, worried about how I was doing.
Let's build a happy home together.
I thought I could have an ordinary happiness. Little did I know back then what would happen. Welcome! It's a bit cramped though. I visited Richard's family home for a family meeting. Patricia, his mother, spoke plainly and was full of energy. I hesitated as I entered the room, thinking it would be just the in-laws, but it was crowded with in-laws, step-grandparents, Richard's brother Charles, and his wife Sarah, and their kids, Thomas and John. Nice to meet you. Wow, that's a lot of people. The house, built by James, Richard's father, felt somewhat run down. Honestly, it was old, but the family welcomed me warmly, easing my nerves. On the way back in the car, speaking of which, there were so many people today. Christmas or Thanksgiving must be quite an event, I said to Richard, who laughed in response.
It really is cramped there. Can't believe they manage to live like that every day.
Hearing this, I was genuinely surprised. Richard's family home was never really spacious. I thought it was just a temporary gathering. 8 people in that house? Wow, that's something. Richard said it was originally just the 4 of them, his in-laws and step-grandparents. But then Charles, who couldn't hold down a job, moved in one day with Sarah and their kids without asking.
Charles will probably move out once he finds a stable job,
Richard said with a laugh. Back then I just thought Richard's family had its challenges, nothing more. After marriage, Richard and I, along with our cat Lucy, lived a peaceful life without kids yet. Richard was fairly helpful around the house, and Lucy was fond of us. As for his family, Charles and his family were still living in that house. The walls were covered in children's scribbles, and Patricia laughed, saying she gave up on cleaning them long ago. Sarah, Charles's wife, always looked tired. She was older than Charles and close to my age, so we became friends quickly. "Hey, Sarah, hurry up!"
"Mary, don't just stand there. We're out of beer."
Whenever I visited, it seemed like Sarah and I were the only ones not sitting down. We were constantly busy, and I wondered if this was our fate. But the thought of Sarah doing this every day was honestly frightening. Sarah worked full-time, filling in for Charles, who hardly worked. I hesitated to ask, but finally did. "Have you ever thought about leaving him?" "I've heard that before." "Well, it's tough as it is, but we have kids, and he used to be so kind." I couldn't see any good in Charles, but I guess they had their reasons. That's what I thought. It was around this time.
"How about we build our own house?"
Richard suddenly suggested. I was surprised, but also happy. Actually, I've had a small dream since I was little. I'd always dreamed of living in a quaint house like those in storybooks, with a white dog in the yard. I have a white dog in the garden. I'd never told anyone, but when I shared this dream with Richard, a bit shyly.
"That sounds great,"
he said. We spent our free days visiting model homes, choosing a housemaker, and a year later, our dream home was completed.
"We've got to make sure we keep up with the mortgage,"
Richard said. "Absolutely," I replied with a smile. On the first weekend after moving in, Richard's family came over for a housewarming party. "Here, Joseph, hand over the gift. We're coming in." "Oh, what a lovely house!" Patricia seemed quite pleased, as if it was her own home. I smiled politely.
"Look, it's a celebration!"
And then Joseph handed me 2 cans of beer, looking like he'd just bought them. I mean, seriously? Charles wandered around the house and, finding our bedroom, exclaimed, "Oh, this bed is super comfy!" Saying that, Charles started rolling around on the bed. The kids, following their father's lead, got excited.
"Look, there's a cat!"
They ran around, chasing our pet cat Lucy. Lucy is friendly, but she had never met so many people at once, so she got scared and hid in the back of the room. Poor Lucy. I glanced at Charles and Richard, who had already started a party with the in-laws. "Mary, Patricia is insisting on appetizers quickly. Can I use your kitchen? And sorry about scaring Lucy," Sarah said apologetically. Why is someone as nice as her with a guy like that? I had grown to care for Sarah like a real sister. "I'll handle it, Sarah. You relax," I said, but she still helped with the cooking while managing the kids. The step-grandparents were always quiet, almost like dolls, not talking much. But they said, "What a lovely home, right, James?"
"Yeah, sorry for the noise,"
James replied, even though the loud ones were the in-laws. The step-grandparents were the ones with common sense in that house. In other words, the odd ones out were the in-laws, Charles, and probably my husband Richard too. From then on, the in-laws and Charles would visit our house almost every weekend. They partied till dawn, so loud that we got complaints from neighbors and even the police once. The step-grandparents, Sarah, and the kids hadn't visited our house since the housewarming, but the in-laws didn't hesitate to put me to work. I was at my wits' end. Richard had also started showing his true colors. Once, I had a cold. I was too weak to prepare dinner and asked Richard, who was home early from work, to pick something up. He came back with 2 hamburgers. I couldn't even think of eating them. "Why hamburgers? I can't eat this right now," I said without thinking, instead of getting angry.
"What are you talking about, Mary? You need to eat to get your strength back,"
Richard said. "What? If I had the energy to eat that, I wouldn't have asked for help in the first place. I thought to myself, by the way, when Richard was sick once, "Want a hamburger?" I asked him sarcastically. His response was,
"No, that's ridiculous. Are you trying to annoy me?"
That's what I said. In short, this family was self-centered and lacked empathy. They were done for as people. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. I'll make sure you all get what you deserve. With that thought, I smirked wickedly. A few days later, I had a business trip scheduled. On the morning of my departure, "Well, I'm off then," I said cheerfully to Richard.
"Was your business trip starting today? What a coincidence. Sarah is also on a business trip from today,"
said Richard. "Really? I had no idea. What a coincidence," I replied.
"Mom said they'd be in trouble without someone to take care of the house."
Richard laughed mockingly, making me think, what a jerk. I was busy during my time away from home. Days flew by quickly, and before I knew it, a lot of time had passed. A major typhoon hit, and I contacted Richard.
"We're fine, but the family home had some serious leaks,"
he replied. Thinking of the old family home, I felt it was understandable. The day I returned home arrived. As I walked from the nearest bus stop to my house, I heard loud, unrefined laughter echoing in the residential area. Is someone having a barbecue in their yard? The noise was that loud. This will surely attract complaints from the neighbors. Wait, what? I was shocked. The loud voices were unmistakably coming from my house. As I cautiously opened the door, I found many bags in the entrance, and the walls were covered in graffiti. Stunned, I was at a loss for words.
"Hey, Mary, welcome back!"
A drunken Richard greeted me. Frustrated by his insensitivity, I entered the living room to find equally drunk in-laws and Charles, with Sarah making appetizers for them in the kitchen. The step-grandparents were quiet as usual, and the kids were happily drawing on the living room walls. Then there was another young woman I didn't know. Overwhelmed by everything, I felt my mind about to snap. "What is all this?" I asked Richard calmly, trying not to get emotional.
Didn't I tell you? The family home had leaks because of the typhoon."
I heard that part. And then? Richard's story was this. The family home had a massive leak, and the in-laws, having nowhere else to go, temporarily moved into our house. Without Sarah, who was away, the in-laws, Charles and Richard, decided,
"We thought, why not live here?"
Richard said proudly. What? Even with this explanation, I was baffled. To my silence,
"It's fine, we're family. We have extra rooms, no problem,"
the in-laws added, smiling.
"It's all right, Mary. The walls got a bit dirty, but it's just kid stuff,"
Charles said nonchalantly. And who is that woman? I asked about the woman lounging on the sofa, fiddling with her phone.
"Oh, that's Karen, a mutual friend of me and Sarah. Right, Sarah?"
Charles asked her. "Yeah, that's right," she answered with a smile.
"This girl, Karen, was kicked out by her parents, and Richard said it was okay for her to stay."
"Thanks in advance," the not-so-bright-looking girl replied, leaving me utterly confused. In our not-so-spacious living room, there were 9 adults and 2 children. The room was a mess, the walls covered in scribbles, making it look nothing like a new house. The family was loud like a dormitory. I couldn't help but lose my temper. Seriously? 9 people is too many. Are you guys planning to start a baseball team or what? Then I realized something. Hey, where's Lucy? Our pet cat Lucy was nowhere to be found. When I asked Richard and the others, they all claimed ignorance, while frantically searching for Lucy.
Lucy, huh? Dad opened the window to smoke and she ran away,
Thomas told me. Charles glared at the boy as if he had said something he shouldn't have. What were you thinking? I told you to be careful with the windows, I said, near tears. Richard, looking annoyed, said,
Oh, come on. It's just a cat. We can get another one. What's with you? If you're unhappy, we can just get divorced, you know?
He said it with such a disdainful face. You just said divorce? I asked.
Yeah, I did. I might consider not doing it if you apologize to us.
Richard, along with the in-laws and Charles, seemed confident that I wouldn't go through with a divorce. I replied, Oh, really? Well, then here, write this. I slammed down the divorce papers I had prepared. My section was already filled out. I fetched my pre-packed bags from my room. Done? Why haven't you written it yet? I'm busy, you know, and said coolly to Richard. They were all shocked by my preparedness. Angrily, Patricia said, Richard, divorce this woman already. We've built the house, so she's useless now. Patricia said that. Realizing too late, Richard said,
Right, Mary. You'll regret divorcing me.
But I had no regrets. What are you talking about? You're the one who's going to struggle. Just write the divorce papers. Once Richard finished writing, I snatched the papers and put them in my bag. Then I went to Charles and said, Here, you need to write this too, handing him the divorce papers. He laughed.
What? When did I marry you?
Looking at the filled-in wife section, Charles said,
Hey, Sarah, this is...
Sarah coldly stared at Charles and said, I'm divorcing you. Write it now, please. To which Charles exclaimed,
Sarah, bite the hand that feeds you, huh?
Joseph was talking nonsense. From my perspective, Sarah had been living like a slave in her in-laws' house. The money she earned was mostly taken by Charles, leaving only a little for living expenses. The money let Charles do whatever he wanted, and the not-so-bright girl in front of me, she was Charles's mistress. Mary, I think my husband is cheating on me. Sarah had confided in me just before Richard suggested building a house. Sarah had been enduring it all for the sake of her children, but recently, Charles had even started selling Sarah's belongings and the kids' toys for his own gain. She had reached her limit. Then Sarah told me a story. After hearing Sarah's story, I was furious. From that day, Sarah and I started planning our divorces. Sarah gathered thorough evidence of the affair. Her recent business trip was a lie. We met halfway to look for a new place to live. Like me, Sarah's parents had passed away, and she had no relatives to turn to. However, a close friend offered her a job at their shop in another state. It was a good location, and our preparations went smoothly. All that was left was to present the divorce papers. I want to get some people out of that hellish house. Sarah had made up her mind and was incredibly strong. She had a strong core, but had been used by her in-laws like she was brainwashed. Thinking it would look suspicious to return together, Sarah went back first. She soon contacted me, informing me about the takeover of my house and Charles's brazen mistress moving in. All our conversations and actions until then were a performance. Knowing what was going on, I told Sarah, We're not living in that house anymore. Let the kids draw on the walls all they want. That's what I told him. Charles, thinking he could now openly live with his mistress, happily signed the divorce papers. Let's go, Sarah. James and everyone, it's time to leave. The step-grandparents stood up and followed Sarah and her children to the door.
Living with people like you, I had given up on life, but Sarah opened my eyes. Do as you please now,
James said, glaring at the family, and left with his great-grandchildren. The in-laws had been taking money from the step-grandparents as pensions. They were truly awful people. Well then, take care, we said as we left like a storm.
You'll regret this.
The family laughed as we left, but we ignored them. Months later, Richard contacted me. Oh, I forgot to block him. I could guess the content of the call, so I answered.
Mary, come back!
Richard sounded desperate. I barely contained my laughter. Come back? We're strangers now, I replied calmly.
Let me talk. Mary, what do you mean? Why aren't you paying the mortgage?
Patricia's voice came through, probably snatching the phone from Richard. What are you talking about? I have no idea. I played dumb, while Patricia sounded frustrated. Apparently, the house's mortgage had already fallen behind last month. When I pressed Richard, he claimed I hadn't been paying the mortgage. What an inconvenience. While I remained silent, Patricia kept talking like a machine gun.
First of all, this house, you guys had a combined income of $75,000, right? We could have built a better house. We built this as a new home, but it's not what we expected.
Originally, they had planned to take over the house. Sarah had informed me of their discussions. Yes, that's true. But with Richard's $30,000 salary, the bank wouldn't lend us more. If we had taken a joint mortgage, maybe we could have gotten a better house. Hearing this,
Richard, you lied!
I could hear Richard and Patricia arguing on the phone. I ignored them, ended the call, and finally blocked his number. Richard had a pretentious personality. Richard always wanted to impress others, especially outside his family. When he suggested building a house, I already had divorce in mind. I told him, a friend's husband got a mortgage on his own. How cool is that? I heard these stories like a spell. Richard, wanting to show off, opted for a solo mortgage. I had to hold back my laughter. He probably didn't tell his family because he was afraid of them knowing the truth. But I didn't care. The house was built to Richard's taste. I had no attachment to it anymore. Richard hadn't cheated, but there were no alimony or penalties in our divorce. So, to spite him, I left him with the mortgage debt as my revenge. Let him suffer. And I was able to rescue Sarah, whom I cared for like a sister, from that house. That was my main goal. Later, they couldn't pay the mortgage and the new house was repossessed. But it was a mess inside, with scribbles everywhere, and walls yellowed by cigarette smoke from Charles and his mistress. It didn't look like a recently built house. Richard had to rent a cheap apartment and Joseph and Patricia ended up moving in with him. They'll probably never leave him alone, like parasites. I don't care, they're strangers to me now. The only good thing about my former in-laws was that the children weren't affected. Otherwise, they were the worst. Sarah, as Charles's ex-wife, successfully claimed alimony through a lawyer. She had to borrow money, but managed to pay it off. I'm glad for her. Charles and his mistress became outcasts in their community and are now missing. They haven't repaid their debts, confirming how awful they are. Sarah is happily working at her friend's place. Her kids are doing well too. I hope they find happiness this time. James and Barbara seem brighter now, like a weight has been lifted. They sold the old family home and are enjoying their retirement in a distant place with their savings. That's great news. As for me, I've requested a transfer to a local office. I was reunited with Lucy, my cat. Thanks to social media, someone in the neighborhood had found and taken care of her. It's good she's friendly. Now, I live alone in my late father's house. With my brother's approval, I'm saving to build my dream house. And someday, I hope to introduce someone special at my father's grave. Today, I'm working hard towards that goal.